Welcome to the Propertybuyer Podcast, where we explore the world of residential and commercial real estate to help you make better decisions about buying, selling, or investing in all types of property. Join me, Rich Harvey, CEO of Propertybuyer.com.au and multi-award-winning buyer's advocate. Our podcast features expert interviews, market trends and insights, and practical tips for navigating the complex world of Australian real estate. Whether you're a home buyer, a seasoned property investor, commercial buyer, developer, or simply curious about the property market, our podcast is for you. Join us as we share our knowledge, strategies, and experience and help you achieve your property goals. Welcome again to the Propertybuyer Podcast. I'm your host, Rich Harvey, and in today's episode, we'll explore what's driving Melbourne's high-end property market in 2025 and beyond. Now, Melbourne's property market has languished somewhat in comparison to other capital cities, but the tide is literally turning as we speak, and we are seeing the first green shoots of growth that will spread. I'm thrilled today to be joined by one of the most respected names in real estate, John Bongiorno, or Jack as he's known to many. With over 40 years experience, he's had a pivotal role as Senior Director at Marshall White. He brings an unmatched perspective on the evolution of trends and property transactions in the luxury market. He's a Senior Director at Marshall White, and he's played a very key role in that leadership team. He's conducted over 4,000 auctions, many of which have broken price records. Beyond the property world, Jack has a deep sense of community that shines through in his philanthropic efforts. He's a passionate supporter of many charities, including Koala Kids, and he donates the proceeds of his best-selling children's book, Santa and His Brothers Down Under. He's also contributing to many other causes close to his heart, and he cheers on Collingwood as his AFL team. Jack, great to have you on the podcast today.
Rich, a privilege to be here. Thanks for having me.
We have a little tradition, Jack, when we start the podcast where I give you a famous quote from a famous person, and today it's from Confucius, and I'd love your perspectives on this thought. And Confucius once said that everything has beauty, but not everyone can see. What do you take from that quote?
Well, Rich, I suppose in my 45 years in selling property, I've never sold a bad property. Every property I've sold has always had some form of beauty. And in the eye of the beholder or the eye of the buyer, there is always some beauty.
That's interesting, isn't it? I guess you got a pretty lucky job, right, selling some high-end real estate, and you must see some cracker properties out there, right?
Oh, look, absolutely. I mean, I'm privileged to, be the group sales director at Marshall White, and for me, it's more about socialising than actually working. I love coming to work every day, and it's an honour and a privilege, as I said, to be looking after some of Melbourne's best real estate.
So, talking of Melbourne's top end, what are the trends that you're seeing this year so far in 2025 and beyond? What's sort of trending in the luxury market at the moment?
Look, at the moment, I think that the demand for the high-end properties really hasn't waned much. I think that the buyers are looking to get into the market, but they're obviously discerning when it comes to this end of the market. The trends are more toward turnkey properties, obviously. I think that's probably always been a part of a trend, but it's probably growing given...
So you're saying people aren't building as much because building costs are so high? They're not actually doing knockdown and mansion rebuilds?
Well, we had that little block of land that Marcus Ciminello sold with us for just over $80 million, and the buyer there, Ed Craven, I think, is spending over $200 million building his new house. So they still go ahead and buy and knock down and build, but I think as a trend, though, just given the length of time that it takes to go through the whole process, there's just greater demand for turnkey properties.
And is that just because of the delay and the hassle of building, do you think, that they prefer turnkey?
Oh, look, the delay, I think, obviously the costs have increased dramatically, and property prices probably haven't kept trend with the cost of building. So, as such, it's more convenience. With a lot of our overseas clients that come in to buy, or our international buyers, they just want to come in and buy something that they can, they can look at, touch, feel, and move into.
I want to just unpack the demand side of things with you, Jack, just briefly. Like you mentioned, demand hasn't waned that much, but just tell us what the demand levels have been like over the last couple of years. Has there been a good volume? Is there never enough stock? And I guess where's this demand coming from?
Look, as real estate agents, there's never enough stock. In our business, it's always based around turnover. I think that one of the trends you asked earlier that we are probably seeing is that people tend to hold properties longer now, at the top end of the market. If you look to the old days, a lot of the big blocks of land, for example, around, Toorak, Hawthorn, Brighton, were bought, sold, subdivided, chopped up, et cetera, et cetera. And so the actual supply has diminished over the years, and especially the quality supply has diminished. So, we are seeing people holding properties longer nowadays as opposed to, the good old days. I was saying to somebody yesterday, I think in Victoria that, the turnover rate was people sold a property every 14 years. I think that you'll see that grow, and it is growing as we definitely know at the moment, because people are buying properties, holding, they're becoming more generational, etc.
Exactly, passing it down. Exactly, yeah. Tell me about the pricing, I guess, or price segments in the top end of the market. Like, where do you see in the Melbourne market? You've mentioned, Brighton, Toorak, South Yarra. Where do you see the top end of the market starting? Is it a $5 million number, a 10 million, 20 million? Like, give us the price segments, and I guess where you see the most demand in each of those price segments, please.
Look, I think generally the greatest turnover that we see in our business is between that $5 and $10 million segment. You wouldn't, I suppose, really call that the top end of the market. I think that once we get beyond, 10 and 20 mil, then, certainly above 20, we get into the top end of the market.
Yeah. It's interesting, isn't it? I mean, it's funny, several years ago, you would have said 5 million was a top number, but, 5 certainly quickly doubles to become 10, 10 doubles to become 20. It's incredible, the rate of compound growth. Wasn't it Albert Einstein said the eighth wonder of the world is compound growth,
Yeah, well, it was a matter of fact, which, just last week we sold a property in Albert Park and in St Vincent Place. In fact, we had two sales in St Vincent Place, one on the north side for an unrenovated house for $12 million, and one that we just sold off market last Friday for $15 million. And, so it's not blasé that we talk those sort of numbers, but those sort of numbers are becoming, more common, certainly here in Melbourne.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So what distinguishes the Melbourne luxury market from, say, Sydney and Brisbane and Perth, for example? Tell us more the unique features of that Melbourne top-end market.
Look, the Melbourne top-end market, is primarily driven by, access to Melbourne's best schools, obviously transport, convenience. Melbourne's an international city. I mean, we're blessed here in Melbourne. We have, an amazing city, surrounded by parklands. We have, great sporting events, as I mentioned, the Australian Open, the tennis, the Grand Prix, the racing carnival. It's the sporting capital of the world. We're recognised internationally. So, the areas that are in most demand, though, tend to be within the private school belt of Melbourne.
It's a significant or a similar driver in Sydney as well, and also Brisbane, the school zones. They are a big factor. But I think it's also, I'd say maybe it's a demographic enclave. I mean, people want to live closer to their own kind or find what I call their tribe, don't they? Would you say that's a driver as well?
Oh, very much so. I mean, you look at the calibre of properties in, say, for example, in Toorak, and they're, like for like, as opposed to, in some other suburbs where you may have, one McMansion, but the rest of the street is fairly average, But, so it does go like for like, absolutely.
It's interesting. I mean, each city's got its unique features. I mean, Brisbane's got the snaking river right through the whole city, and Sydney's got an amazing harbour. I mean, it's really got three waterways. You've got the Hawkesbury, you've got the actual harbour, and then you've got the areas around Caringbah, etc. But anything around water, I think, and beaches, waterways is definitely a big driver. I mean, I just bought a property for a client off market last week in Freshwater for $6.5 million, and the brief for that particular client was they wanted to be able to walk to the beach within, 5 to 7 minutes. So that was their
Yes.
brief, and they wanted to be closer to the action. So I think your point is about the buyers for the luxury market. They want the convenience, they want the schools, and they're going to pay for it, and that's why the price is that high. But tell me more. What are the other, I guess, motivations for buyers? I mean, we've unpacked a few of them there: schools, parklands. Is there any other motivation for buyers buying in the luxury? Is it to prove they've made it? Is there some sort of an iconic status? What else is driving their decisions to buy luxury properties?
It's those couple of streets, for example, that I mentioned in Albert Park. I mean, they rate as some of the highest areas per square metre rate in Melbourne. Primarily it's like for like. You're surrounded by similar types of properties, similar calibre types of properties, with convenience. To walk to one of the best villages in all of Melbourne, and then you go to Toorak, for example, and you have, $100 million homes, that are the common theme in some of the streets. In Georges Road, I can think of, at least half a dozen properties that fit into that calibre, for example. So it's driven by the aspect of similarity, driven by the things that we've mentioned, parklands, but easy access into the city, etc.
Yeah.
Just easy access to everything.
Yeah, I think another one too to add to it is maybe the fact that your home doesn't attract capital gains tax. I think a lot of people these days, particularly business owners, are pouring money into their principal place of residence as a great store of wealth. And as you've mentioned about the intergenerational wealth transfer, I think that's a big driver. Would you say?
Look, I think that's a really good point, Rich. Certainly here in Victoria, we've seen the exodus of investors or people buying investment properties, due to the compliance issues, tax laws, stamp duty, etc., land tax. So it's been very off-putting, and people are really primarily driven into their principal place of residence, which is the last bastion of a tax-free capital gain.
Yeah. Talking of the, that investors being put off, I mean, we've got a lot of investors that we're recommending now buy in Melbourne in the lower price segments as well, the more affordable range, and they're really taking our advice for that. But do you think that the extra land tax is really that bad? Is it really draconian, or is it just like really annoying? Like, give us a sense of what's happening, but also maybe mention about what's happening down around Portsea and Sorrento in the Mornington Peninsula area.
That's right. Look, I think it is draconian. I think that, we talk about the housing crisis here in Victoria, and, the political parties are trying to solve, issues for lower income workers. Quite frankly, I think that they're only making it worse for lower income workers. They can't afford to get into the housing market because the supply situation, certainly here in Victoria, driven by tax, and irresponsible government spending money, quite frankly, is the fact that, we've seen land taxes here in Victoria, double, triple in the last 4 or 5 years. Down on the peninsula, there are hundreds of properties for sale at the moment. We've had, mum and dads, sort of work hard over the years. They've had their house in the city. They've had their, holiday house down the beach, and now they just can't afford to keep it because, it's just, the cost of maintenance, the cost of land tax.
Is that an opportunity, Jack, do you think, for another investor maybe, or someone who's always wanted the beach house down at Sorrento to go, you know what, there's a few people exiting, maybe it's a time to buy? What would you say to that?
Look, most definitely. I think that, where there's something, in this sort of scenario, water will always find its level eventually. We are finding a little bit of a washout, though, of people that are coming to grips with all of this, and I think it's going to take a little bit of time. I think with with interest rates coming down, it may spark a little bit more interest in some of those sort of properties as such. But for the time being, I think it does provide buyers who are opportunistic to look to get into it. It's primarily owner occupiers that are buying in those sort of areas.
Right.
We're not seeing a heck of a lot of people coming into the market wanting to buy a second property that is going to attract land tax, as a holiday house as such.
Are there many Airbnbs available down there, or are they pretty few and far between?
Oh, look, there are, but I think again, the taxes on Airbnbs have been introduced. For example, in the Mornington City Council have introduced a tax on properties, by Airbnb. So,
Even harder again.
it's,
Yeah. Tell me about the types of people, the nationalities. Where are they coming from? Who's buying high-end property in Melbourne, in the prime suburbs? Are they coming from overseas? Are they all kind of a particular, they're Chinese buyers, Asian buyers, European buyers? Where are they coming from?
Look, primarily in the last 5, 10, 15 years, we've seen a massive advent of Asian buyers come into the market, primarily the Chinese. Victoria has, I think the largest population of Chinese in Australia, and we've seen a lot of the Chinese buyers that came in and moved into the outer suburbs, gradually moving, further in. The people that started, 5, 10 kilometres out of CBD have moved, another 5 kilometres in, then they're 5 kilometres into Toorak, for example. So Chinese are probably the biggest segment of the market, and the strongest segment of the market. We see a lot of, expats that come back into the country at the moment. People coming in from overseas or expats coming back from overseas with the weak Australian dollar. See it as a huge advantage to, people from the US.
It's a massive opportunity, isn't it, that, Jack? Because I actually went over to Singapore in January and spoke to a whole bunch of expats, and I met up with some really good referral partners up there, and particularly the brokers are saying, if the dollar's at 60, 62 cents or whatever it is today, adds massively to the buying power. If you're earning US dollars or even Singaporean dollars and you bring that back to Australia, that's fantastic. Like you could do a currency play and, get a property 10, even 20, maybe 30% cheaper than what you'd be paying in Australian dollars,
Look, it's really interesting, that point, because I was only talking with somebody yesterday about that particular aspect, that their property, overseas, has experienced quite a boom. And, there's a buyer in a buyer that's coming back to Australia who lives in Miami, and an Australian expat. And, apparently the Miami market's doing very well at the moment. So they're looking to convert, their sale from there, take advantage of the Australian dollar, come back into Australia, get into the market. And they're primarily looking at that peninsula market. You just mentioned Portsea as making that a principal place of residence and buying a little base here in the city, in Melbourne.
Yeah, that's it. We really appreciate you tuning in to the Property Buyer Podcast, and I hope that you're finding our expert interviews helpful. So that we can keep providing this information and growing our audience, we rely on word-of-mouth recommendations. If you found this information useful, could I please ask you to share this podcast with your friends, family and colleagues, and ask them to subscribe to the Property Buyer Podcast. It would be a big help, and we'd be very grateful for your support. Thanks once again for sharing the links, and now let's get back to the podcast. So Jack, tell us about what suburbs you think are really going to fly in the Melbourne luxury market. Like, is Toorak going to be the go-to place, South Yarra, Brighton, or do you need to go further south? What areas have got consistent capital growth you think going forward, and the best areas to buy in for the luxury market?
Sure, Rich. If you have a look over the decades of Melbourne property prices and performance, the areas that you just mentioned, your Toorak, South Yarra, your Hawthorn, Kew, Canterbury, Camberwell, and then we move down to the Bayside areas such as Elba Park, Middle Park, Brighton, have traditionally, and I think will always maintain, consistent and good capital growth, primarily driven by what we discussed earlier with, convenience to the school belt, to facilities, to shops, to transport, to amenities, etc. Some of those fringe areas, around those suburbs, primarily probably show, good potential, such as if we look at, your Surrey Hills, Bourne sort of areas. Then we move into the city and you look at, Malvern, I think at the moment represents good value around Toorak, Armadale. Then you move down to, as I mentioned, Middle Park and Elba Park, those areas. I think South Melbourne, Port Melbourne represent good value to Brighton. I'd look at areas such as Hampton, Beaumaris, Black Rock, etc.
Okay. Jack, does the proximity to water in the bay, does that provide a bigger driver for price than being close to schools, do you think? Or are they equal?
Look, they're fairly equal, but again, being probably around what we again mentioned earlier, just being around like-minded properties. If you go to the Brighton market, for example, or if you use that as a bit of a yardstick, you don't have too many properties down there where, as I mentioned, St George's Road, where you have a handful of properties that are probably in the vicinity, of $100 million. You don't have that, for example, in some of those other suburbs that we've just spoken about, such as Brighton or Albert Park or even Hawthorn, to that matter.
So what you're telling me is there's a select few suburbs that have the real top of the top, of the charts type properties.
Yeah, that's right. And look, it's primarily driven around land size too.
Yeah, cool. And tell me, moving on from suburbs, tell us about the features. Like in these properties you go through, what are the sort of incredible features that add the most value to top end properties? Is it the 4-car garage? Is it the home cinema? The 1,000-bottle wine cellar? Tell us the things you've seen and educate our audience, please.
Look, the wow factor, to any property is really the factor that's the biggest driver in this market. Where somebody walks in and just goes, wow, this is, just incredible. The architectural features of a property as such. What you just mentioned before, for most of the people in this sort of caliber, that they do obviously have quite a bit of money. So the basement car parking, because, there's a property we've got for sale at the moment for $35 million. That's got a 10-car basement, and and in that basement he's got a beautiful collection of cars. So the weekender and the off road.
I saw one last year up at Wahroonga. This guy, he calls it the bunker. I know the builder, and he's got a 7-car garage, but he put some 20,000 cubic meters of concrete in to build this thing. It's incredible, Some people just go over the top.
And the wine cellar. I mean, look, people in this league, they're entertainers. They like to entertain. They like to, look at fine dining, fine wines, and the cellar's always a big feature as to people's wealth. And
how significant are swimming pools and outdoor areas and landscaping for the Melbourne market compared to say Sydney or Brisbane?
Yeah, I think landscaping's a big feature. Look, the swimming pool's always a big feature. There was another house that I went to yesterday that we're going to be lucky enough to sell, and it actually had 2 swimming pools. It had the 25-metre lap pool that was indoor, in a cabana-style area, and then it had the outdoor swimming pool for the kids. So
wow, so 2 pools. Wow, amazing.
2 pools in the one house.
There you go. That's amazing. Quite elaborate. I mean, ice baths seem to be quite a new trend. I'm quite into doing them myself these days. But do you find that a lot of these homes have their own personal gym, ice bath, sauna kind of health regime?
Most people. Yeah, they have that. The steam room. They're all those little quirky extras or anything that's health-related areas such as your gyms and what you just mentioned are bigger features nowadays, because I think that people are obviously more conscious of maintaining a healthy lifestyle than what we were 20 years ago.
Absolutely. Yeah, I can definitely vouch for cold water swimming. It makes you invigorated. I've had my cold water swim this morning and feel fantastic. But anyway, what else can I ask you, Jack? I want to ask you just, I guess, about the challenges of the luxury market. Like, what do you think is going to be either the headwind or the tailwind as we head into the rest of 2025 and 26? What's going to push the luxury market forward? What's going to limit the market? What do you think?
I think that supply is going to be an issue moving forward. I've been saying this for a little while now, but with the advent of the Asian buyer, we are seeing those clients hold properties, as I mentioned earlier, that they tend to buy a property and not sell. So I think supply is going to be more and more limited as we move forward. Obviously, we've got population growth always happening, here in Victoria. So and to Sydney and Brisbane, obviously. So, and the major capital cities, but yeah, population growth, it's purely supply and demand. I think that supply is going to become harder to find. I think that, demand's only going to increase over and as history tells us, Rich, property only does one thing. I think that the only potential headwinds I see are any, imposts that are imposed on people's principal place of residences. If they introduce a death tax, if they introduce a capital gains tax of some form, as such, I'm a little bit fearful of that. But look, never worry about something until you've got something to worry about.
Exactly. And to what extent do you reckon interest rates are going to impact the luxury market? Do you think, my view is they don't have as much impact because people are generally wealthier and has a little bit. Obviously, they do have some macro impact, but what's your view on how much interest rates will impact the prestige market?
Look, it's like the ripple effect. If we have interest rates decrease, which is what everybody's forecasting this year, which 100%. Looks fantastic.
Yep.
It starts in the lower price ranges and it ripples through all the way to the top end of the market. So, look, it's only positive for all markets, and it will have an impact on the upper end of the market as well. So fingers crossed.
Yeah, exactly. Well, I'm definitely predicting a minimum of 0.25% on the 20th of May. I'm actually doing another webinar myself on the 21st of May talking about get ready for rate cuts, because I think there'll be at least 3, if not 4 rate cuts this year. So I'm predicting a full 1% rate cut by the end of December this year.
It's funny you say that because I completely concur with that. I think that, that we may see up to a 1 full percentage rate cut by the end of the year.
Yeah. We talked a little bit about architectural styles, but just back to sort of the specifics of luxury properties. To what extent is sustainability and energy efficiency and all of that sort of thing impacting design and the sort of the features that people want these days? Do people ask for that? Are they asking for solar panels and energy efficiency, or is it just give me everything?
I think people want everything. Nowadays you've got the advent of being able to use things on your telephone. So, to the point where you can turn on lights, you can turn on heating, you can turn on air conditioning, you can, get your spa ready, you can get your sauna ready, you can do it all from your phone before you get home. So I think that those aspects, have certainly crept into, the new architectural features and, security here in Melbourne's a big issue. So, with what we've seen with the increase in crime, unfortunately. So again, that's basically utilised through telephones and technology nowadays. So, but it's interesting. There was even talking about the place that I just mentioned with the 2 swimming pools. I went through that yesterday, and the interior design on that was absolutely spectacular. It was something that you just walked into and you went, wow. There was another house that we sold in Toorak recently, that looked like a concrete bunker from the outside, and there was no windows. Well, there are no windows on the house, and you'd think, oh my God, what am I stepping inside a bunker, as I said.
Yeah.
But you got inside, and then the dramatic way that they'd used the windows, within the property,
right.
As I said, were dramatic and just gave you a sense of light, space, openness, and integrated, a beautifully landscaped garden with the inside. So it really integrated inside with outside just wonderfully. And, you thought, oh my God, wouldn't I love to live in this house?
And I presume they've all got great heating and cooling facilities and great natural airflow for summer, all that sort of thing, have they?
Oh, very much so. Yeah, absolutely. All climate controlled and everything as such. And, on a sustainable, manner nowadays that people are really conscious of.
So Jack, in your business in selling property and auctioning property, what kind of is your unique selling proposition? How do you win so many listings and stay so competitive in the luxury market yourself?
Look, I think, Marshall White in general, I look at our key operators here and they've been in the business. We're lucky enough to have longevity with a lot of our people and, they've been in the business for decades, and with our company for decades. And, it's primarily repeat business. James Toston and myself were at a home last night and as we said to the vendors, we're lucky enough that we've sold, for families, 10, 20, 30, in one family instance, I reckon it'd be 40 or 50 houses. So our business is primarily over 90% referral based. We have the strongest database out of our 10 office organisation. We're lucky enough that we're not a franchise group. So, the sharing of intel and information on people is I think second to none.
And how do you maintain those relationships? Like you talk about longevity, that's fantastic, and obviously there's a high level of trust. But how do you maintain that sort of long-term trust with clients when they're not selling for like 10, 15, even 20 years? Like obviously you send them a birthday card or something, but what do you do to stay in touch with them so very frequently and win their business?
Look, again, I think that as I said to you at the start of this podcast, for me, this is more about socialising than working. And
so for you, it's a lifestyle business.
It's a lifestyle business. For example, I went to a 60th birthday last Friday at a friend's house in Toorak, and it was absolutely remarkable. And out of, the probably 120 guests that he had there, I probably would have known 118. So,
amazing.
it's just great that, we get to, not just, sell property and meet great people, but we mix with great people. We get involved, a lot of our people get involved in community events. I think that that's really important, to get behind. And we do a lot of philanthropic things. We've got, I know that, we've got a function coming up in a couple of weeks' time, and, a lot of our people here donate their time, donate their services, donate their money and gifts, and go out and get involved in the community and get involved in these charities and actually, do things rather than, as I said, just give money. They actively get involved. So we're always mixing in the areas, in business and outside of business with the people we deal with.
That's great. Is there any particularly memorable sale that you've conducted over the last decade or so and that was just really stood out to you? Tell us, I guess, how it came about, how you sold it, the negotiations and what you sold it for. Have you got anything that stands out?
Oh, look, I always remember there was a great house in Lancel Road that we sold for a very good friend of mine and his wife. Sorry, in Lancel Road in Toorak. And it was just a magnificent home. It was just a very, it was a house with a certain wow factor about it. It was, it was on about 3,000 square meters, home, pool, tennis court, everything as such, everything that opened and shut, beautiful indoor, outdoor entertaining areas, a great balance of living areas together with the bedroom spaces. So it was sold for $43 million that I looked after with Marcus Ciminello. That was a sale. One of the auctions that always stands out in my mind, I think, was back in about 2007 that I did for the Ansett estate. A lot of people wouldn't remember, but we had Ansett Airlines, started by a chap, Reginald Ansett. Bob Ansett, yeah, sorry, that's right, before Reginald. And we sold the estate down there, and that was a property down there. It had a reserve of $6 million, and it was a beautiful property on Mount Eliza on the cliff overlooking the water and everything as such. And we had about 1,000 people there at the auction on a Sunday, and I did the auction, and we sold it for 14.2, and I think it set a residential record, back at the time. But
and the guide was 6 million at the time, was it? Is it?
Well, the reserve was 6 million. So
the reserve was 6 years old for 14.
Yeah,
wow,
14. Yeah,
that would have been a remarkable result on the day, I suppose, because of the high profile nature of the owner. I suppose it got a lot of attention, right? So
yeah, look, it was just an iconic property, and one of those landmark properties, and that again, I think, is another aspect to it that, some of the properties that we sell are iconic and landmarks. So, they're the properties that are always in demand.
Yeah, fantastic. Well, Jack, I've only got a couple more questions for you. I know you've got a busy schedule, but what's your outlook for the Melbourne property market for the next 5 to 10 years?
Look, I think I come back to the point that Melbourne's just such an exciting, livable city. We're blessed with what we've got here with our, beautiful open spaces and facilities, amenities, sporting events, eateries, the coffee culture. everything that Melbourne has to offer is phenomenal. Our population just always increases. You go to anywhere in the world and everybody wants to come and live in Australia, and they certainly, a lot of people know Melbourne and Sydney is primarily the two major areas that they want to come to. So, I'm super positive about our market, for the next 5-10 years. I think that, any investment in real estate should always be looked at from a long-term point of view, not short-term. That, sometimes people try to get their timing right. I always say just get the property right. So, and if you see something you like, buy it. Don't worry about timing. But no, look, it's real estate only does one thing. I mean, over time, and that's been proven over the last century. So it'll continue to do so for the next century.
Yeah, look, I'd endorse those comments about the direction of the Melbourne market. I actually think it's undervalued, not just in the top end market, but certainly in the lower and medium price ranges. I think it's been undervalued, and because it's been held back because of the COVID overhang for a period of time, and obviously some of the government policies are very negative, but I think there's a big groundswell of interest, and we're seeing a lot of investors and a lot of capital flowing down to Melbourne. I think that'll really play out quite strongly over the next decade. So Melbourne's medians, currently just over about $1,050,060. You've got Sydney, it's almost 1.7. So there's a huge gap between Sydney and Melbourne. And Melbourne typically, it's only about a 30% gap normally. So I think there's a lot of quick catch up to be done. So any savvy investors out there listening, I think Melbourne certainly should be on your radar. Jack, one last question for anyone looking to buy and crack into the luxury property market. What advice would you give them?
What advice would I give them? Is, look hard and fast. Don't just rely on what you see on the portals. Certainly, what you see online is probably, or sometimes possibly at only half of the market.
I was going to ask you, how much is sold off market? You reckon 50% at the top end?
I think so. Like even if I look at that sale, those two sales in Albert Park the other day, one was on market, one was off market. So, it's probably a 50-50 situation. So get friendly with your major or your local estate agent, and make sure that you're always active. Be proactive, not reactive.
Yeah, we'll get friendly with a local buyer's agent like ourselves, so we can. We uncover huge amounts of buyers of off-market properties through our relationships with yourselves.
Couldn't agree more. I think that the advent and the strength and the growth of buyers agents in the last 5-10 years particularly, I think really is fantastic. I think that for buyers and the service that you provide. Are absolutely outstanding. So yeah, absolutely. In fact, that's probably the best advice. Use a buyer's agent.
Thanks. But obviously have the cash and as you said before, when you find the right one, there's not a high volume of these kind of properties, right? So when you do find one that ticks the right boxes, a lot of people go, oh, is there another one to compare? And if they hesitate, someone else will come in over the top and you've lost it. So
that's right. And Rich, just to your point, and again giving you guys all a plug. Our first port of call, is primarily through to advocates as such. So I would say, more than 3/4 of the business that we do off market is via advocates.
There you go. Interesting. Yeah. Well, Jack Bongiorno, thank you so much for your time today. It's been an absolute pleasure. Thanks for unpacking and giving us a little bit of insight into your world of luxury real estate. And thanks so much. Really appreciate it.
Thanks for having me, Rich. It's been a privilege. Thank you.
Thank you, everybody, for listening to the Property Buyer Podcast. We'll be back with another episode very soon. Bye. Thanks for being with us on another Property Buyer Podcast. If you have a question you'd like to ask, please click on the SpeakPipe link and we'll answer this during the next episode. If you're looking to buy a residential or commercial property in the near future and would like to get the added advantage of having a buyer's advocate on your side, then please reach out to my team today and send us your inquiry and we'd be delighted to help. Please visit our website at propertybuyer.com.au, where you can stay updated with all my latest market updates, weekly blogs and live suburb profiles to help you make better property decisions. We look forward to connecting with you again on the next Property Buyer Podcast.